He divorced me on a Tuesday. The words on the papers in front of Mariam Bello didn't blur. They didn't swim. They sat there, sharp and clean, the way a blade looks before you realize it's already cut you. She was still wearing the dress. The black one, the fitted one with the gold accents at the waist that she'd bought 3 weeks ago for the dinner that was supposed to save everything. The dinner Kelvin had canceled, then rescheduled, then canceled again, until this morning when his attorney called and said, "Come to the office instead. Bring nothing, sign everything." Mariam had worn the dress anyway. She didn't know why. Maybe because she'd already paid for it. Maybe because some part of her still believed, even then, that Kelvin Okoro would look at her across that conference table and remember what they were. He didn't look at her at all. Kelvin, her voice came out steadier than she felt. 7 years, Kelvin. He finally looked up, and what Mariam saw in his face was the thing she hadn't prepared for, not cruelty, not guilt, just patience. The practiced patience of a man who had already made his decision weeks ago and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "I know how long it's been," he said. "That's why I'm being generous." Generous? She looked down at the settlement figure. Her hands didn't tremble. Mariam Bello did not tremble in front of people, but something cold moved through her chest. The number was an insult, dressed up as a favor. "You're a good woman," Kelvin continued, straightening his cufflinks, the ones she'd chosen for their 5th anniversary, the ones she'd had engraved. "But I need someone who fits where I'm going. Amaka understands my world. Her family has infrastructure, connections. You and I," he paused, "the way someone pauses when they want to sound thoughtful rather than cruel, we've outgrown each other. You know that." Mariam knew no such thing. What she knew was this. She had worked nights for 2 years to cover the cash flow gap when his business almost collapsed. She had turned down a promotion in London because he said the timing wasn't right for them. She had made herself smaller, quieter, easier, the way water takes the shape of whatever holds it, and he had looked at all that accommodation and decided it was smallness. "Amaka's father is backing my expansion," Kelvin said. "The engagement is it's already moving forward. I need this to be clean, Mariam. I need you to be graceful about it." There it was, graceful. The word everyone had always used for Mariam like it was a compliment. Like being graceful was the best thing a woman like her could be. She picked up the pen. "I'll be in touch," she said, and she signed. What Kelvin did not know, what no one in that room knew, was that Mariam's phone had buzzed twice during his speech. A message from an attorney she'd never heard of, representing an aunt the family had always dismissed as strange. A recluse, an eccentric, a woman who had apparently spent 40 years quietly building one of the most powerful investment portfolios in East Asia. And she had left all of it to Mariam. Every share, every property, every alliance, including the binding agreement with the Jung family, Korea's most feared dynasty, and the condition attached to it. To activate the inheritance and protect the assets from acquisition, the heir must enter a formal marriage with Jung Woo-Jin within 60 days of the estate transfer. Mariam sat in the parking garage of Kelvin's attorney's office and read the message 4 times. Then she looked at the dress she was still wearing, the one bought for a second chance that never came, and she felt something shift inside her. Not grief, not relief. Calculation. Welcome, friends. If you love stories about women who rise, revenge served cold, and dangerous men who finally meet their match, you're in the right place. Drop a crown in the comments if you're already Team Mariam. Because this story, it's only just beginning. For the first time in 7 years, Mariam Bello stopped trying to be graceful. She made a call. "Jung Woo-Jin," said the voice on the other end. Low, composed, the voice of a man who didn't waste words. "My name is Mariam Bello," she said. "I believe we have 60 days to get married." A pause, brief, precise. "I've been expecting your call," he said. "Your aunt told me you'd wait until you had no other options before you used this one." She was wrong, Mariam said. "I have other options. I'm choosing this one." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. The attorney's office was on the 14th floor of a building Mariam had passed 100 times without ever noticing. That felt right, somehow, very much her aunt's style. Adiz Nwasu had spent a lifetime being unnoticed by people who should have been paying attention. The attorney, a small, precise man named Mr. Johnson, who spoke the way people do, when they've delivered extraordinary news so many times it no longer surprises them, set a tablet on the desk between them and folded his hands. "She recorded this 8 months ago," he said. "She was very specific about when you should see it." Mariam pressed play. Her aunt looked exactly as she always had, unhurried, faintly amused by something the rest of the room couldn't see. She was sitting in what looked like a Seoul apartment, city lights behind her, a cup of tea she wasn't drinking on the table beside her. "Mariam," her aunt's voice was warm in a way it never quite was in person, or maybe it had always been that way, and Mariam had never known how to receive it. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and Kelvin has almost certainly done something foolish. I want you to know I'm not surprised about either." Mariam's throat tightened. "I built what I built because I understood one thing early. The world only underestimates quiet women once. After that, it's your advantage to keep or squander." A pause. "I didn't tell you about any of this because you weren't ready. Not because you lacked intelligence, you've always had more than enough of that, but because you were still trying to make yourself fit into a life that was never the right size for you. You are ready now. I made sure of it." The video ended. Mariam sat with it for a moment. The grief was there, sharp and real, the specific ache of mourning someone you realize, too late, you never fully knew. But underneath it was something else. Something that felt like being handed a photograph of yourself taken from an angle you'd never seen before. Her aunt had watched. All those years of odd gifts and cryptic phone calls and visits that felt more like assessments than family. She had been watching, and she had seen something worth waiting for. Mr. Johnson slid a folder across the desk. "Shall we go through the assets?" Mariam straightened in her chair. "Yes," she said, "let's." The folder was thicker than she expected. Mr. Johnson gave her time to read, which she appreciated. He was the kind of attorney who understood that some information needed to land before it could be discussed, that there was a difference between hearing a number and actually absorbing what that number meant for the rest of your life. The estate was structured in 3 parts: properties across Lagos, Singapore, and Seoul. Controlling shares in a conglomerate she had seen referenced in financial publications without ever connecting to her aunt. And the alliance, a binding, legally documented partnership with the Jung family of Korea, built over 18 years of what her aunt had simply called mutual understanding. The clause was on page 41. Mr. Johnson had tabbed it. To prevent hostile acquisition of the Nwasu assets by competing interests, the heir must enter a formal marriage with Jung Woo-Jin, current head of Jung Group operations, within 60 days of estate transfer. Failure to fulfill this condition returns controlling shares to open acquisition. Mariam read it twice, then she looked up. "She built this in deliberately," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Your aunt was very precise," Mr. Johnson confirmed. "The Park-Lim Consortium has been attempting to acquire her assets for 6 years. She wanted the alliance formalized before they could move. The marriage clause makes it legally airtight." "And Jung Woo-Jin, tell me about him." Mr. Johnson had clearly been waiting for this. He slid a second folder across the desk, thinner but denser. Jung Woo-Jin, 41, CEO of Jung Group, legitimate. And the briefing made clear in careful language, considerably more than that in the spaces where legitimacy became a matter of perspective. The kind of man, the note said, whose reputation arrived in a room before he did and rearranged the furniture. There was a third document she hadn't asked for. She almost missed it, tucked beneath the Jung briefing. Okoro Ventures, Q3 filing, a column of figures that told a story Kelvin had clearly been hoping no one would read. His business wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing. Quietly, methodically, in the way things collapse when someone has been making bad decisions for longer than anyone realized. And Amaka's family, The woman he'd left her for, their finances were equally hollow. The connections he'd traded her for didn't exist. Mariam set the file down. She felt nothing that resembled satisfaction, just clarity, clean and cold as glass. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "arrange the meeting." Seoul arrived the way important things often do, quietly, and all at once. The Jung Group headquarters occupied the top 4 floors of a building in Gangnam that didn't need to announce itself. No excessive signage. No grand lobby art designed to intimidate visitors. Just clean lines, expensive silence, and staff who moved with the particular efficiency of people who understood that their employer's time had a specific and significant value. Mariam had been on a plane for 11 hours. She had slept for 3 of them, reviewed the briefing documents for 4, and spent the remaining time deciding exactly who she was going to be when she walked through those doors. Not the woman from the conference room. Not the one who had worn a dress to a divorce and signed her name with steady hands while something inside her quietly broke. Someone else, someone her aunt had apparently always known was there. The assistant led her to a private meeting room on the 38th floor, floor-to-ceiling glass. The city spread out below like a circuit board, everything connected, everything purposeful. She was standing at the window when the door opened. Jung Woo-Jin was not what the briefing documents had prepared her for. The documents had given her facts, his age, his portfolio, the scope of his operations above and below the line of what governments like to officially acknowledge. What they hadn't conveyed was his stillness. He crossed the room without urgency, without performance, without any of the subtle theater that powerful men usually employed when meeting someone for the first time. He simply arrived, sat down, looked at her. The look was what caught her. Not assessment exactly, more like the specific attention of someone encountering a problem they find genuinely interesting. "Ms. Bello," his English was precise, lightly accented. "I'm glad you came quickly. Some heirs take weeks to decide." "I don't have weeks," Mariam said. She sat down across from him. "Neither do you." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not a smile, the suggestion of one. He laid out the terms without preamble. A formal marriage, documented and publicly visible, shared residence in Seoul for the duration of the activation period. Full protection, his security infrastructure extended to cover her. In exchange, the alliance held, the assets transferred cleanly, and the Park-Lim consortium found every acquisition attempt blocked before it could form. "I won't pretend this is conventional," he said, "but I want to be clear about what I'm offering, not warmth, not performance. Loyalty to the agreement and to you as my partner in it, completely and without exception." Mariam thought about the cufflinks, the anniversaries, the careful, practiced reasonableness of a man explaining why she wasn't enough. "That's more," she said, "than I've been offered in some time." She extended her hand. He shook it. The grip was firm and brief and entirely without pretense. She stood to leave. "Ms. Bello," his voice was quiet, "your aunt told me you were the sharpest person she had ever met." A pause, measured and deliberate. "I'm beginning to see why she was rarely wrong." Mariam didn't let him see what that did to her. But in the elevator going down, alone with the city rising up through the glass, she pressed her fingers briefly to her sternum, where something that had been very still for a very long time had just moved. She filed it away. For later. They married on a Thursday morning, 12 days after the meeting in Seoul. The ceremony was held in a private room of a building that didn't appear on any public registry, the kind of venue that existed specifically for occasions that required documentation without spectacle. There were 7 people present, including the officiant and Mr. Johnson, who had flown in from Lagos with the estate paperwork and a small, knowing expression that Mariam chose not to examine too closely. She wore black. The gown had been delivered to her hotel suite the evening before, no note attached, but she recognized her aunt's precision in the cut, fitted, gold-accented at the waist, the kind of dress that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. She put on the diamond earrings she'd packed almost without thinking, looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 5 seconds, and went downstairs. Woo-Jin was already there. Long dark coat over a black suit, hair neat, expression composed in the way of a man who had made his decision and was simply moving through the logistics of it. He looked at her when she entered the room with the same quality of attention he'd offered in the meeting, still focused, like she was something worth getting right. The ceremony took 11 minutes. When it was done, Woo-Jin said, "The photographs will be released this afternoon." "You're not asking," Mariam observed. "I'm informing," he said. "This only works if the right people see it quickly. I assume you understand that." She did. She also understood, though neither of them said it, exactly who else would see them. The photographs were elegant and precisely composed, the kind that communicated power without effort. They moved through certain circles the way Woo-Jin had intended, quickly, quietly, and with devastating effect. Mariam learned about Kelvin's reactions secondhand, through a mutual contact who called her 3 days later, barely concealing their astonishment. Disbelief first, apparently, then something that looked very much like the beginning of panic. She listened, thanked the contact, and ended the call without comment. What mattered more was the inner circle. Woo-Jin introduced her across the following week: dinners, private meetings, a succession of rooms filled with people who had known him for years and were now deciding what to make of the woman beside him. Some accepted her immediately, with the pragmatic respect of people who trusted his judgment. Others watched, waited, looked for the place where she would soften or defer or reveal some uncertainty they could use to measure her. She gave them nothing. Instead, she did what her aunt had taught her without ever nomming the lesson. She paid attention. She learned who deferred to whom before the entrees arrived. She noted who spoke to Woo-Jin directly and who addressed their remarks to the room. She filed names, histories, pressure points, allegiances. By the end of the week, she knew more about his world than most people who had been in it for years. Woo-Jin noticed. He didn't say so. But one evening, as they left a dinner where she had said very little and absorbed everything, he held the car door open and said quietly, "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" Mariam asked. "Making people think you're not paying attention." She got in the car without answering. But she didn't hide the small, precise smile either. The sessions began the Monday, after the last dinner. Woo-Jin's private office was on the 39th floor, one above the meeting room where they'd first spoken, a detail Mariam noted and didn't comment on. It was a spare room, functional in the way that very expensive things sometimes chose to be. One long table. 2 chairs positioned across from each other rather than side by side. A view of the city that had stopped being impressive to him years ago and hadn't stopped being useful. He began with the legitimate businesses. The conglomerate structure, its subsidiaries, the pressure points in each market where her aunt's shares carried specific weight. Mariam listened without interrupting, asked questions only when she needed clarification rather than reassurance, and retained everything the first time. He noticed that immediately. By the 3rd session, he had moved on to the other matters. How information actually moved between certain families, which alliances were transactional and which ran deeper. How to read the difference between a room that respected you and a room that was waiting for you to make a mistake. "Your aunt operated on instinct in these spaces," Woo-Jin said. "Decades of it, you don't have decades." "Then teach me the framework behind the instinct," Mariam said. He looked at her for a moment, then he reopened the folder. The sessions lengthened without either of them deciding they would. What began as structured briefings developed edges. She started pushing back, not combatively but precisely, identifying the places where his reasoning had a seam she could pull. He responded not by simplifying, but by going deeper, which told her something about how he measured people. He expected her to keep up. She did, and then she went further. There was an afternoon, the 2nd week, a Thursday, the city gray outside the glass, when she was walking him through her read of a proposed acquisition, pointing at a clause in the document that she thought concealed a different risk than the one everyone was discussing. She made her case in 3 sentences, clean and without qualification. He looked up from the page. Not at the document, at her. It lasted less than 4 seconds. But in those 4 seconds, something shifted in his expression. The composed, deliberate attention he always gave her replaced briefly by something less managed. Something that didn't have a place in the terms of their arrangement. He looked back down at the document. "You're right," he said. "Flag it for the legal team." Mariam turned to make a note. She kept her face entirely neutral. The discipline of 7 years of graceful composure, finally useful for something. But she had seen it, catalogued it with the same quiet precision she applied to everything else in this new life she was building, the names, the pressure points, the things people revealed when they forgot, just for a moment to be careful. She filed it, said nothing, and waited to see what he would do with it next. The call came on a Tuesday, 6 weeks and 4 days after the wedding. Mariam was in the office, her office now, the one adjoining Woo-Jin's that had been cleared and furnished without her asking, because he was the kind of man who anticipated logistics before they became inconveniences. She was reviewing a property transfer document when her personal phone lit up with a number she hadn't deleted, because deleting it would have felt like a decision made in emotion rather than reason. She let it ring twice, then she answered. "Mariam," Kelvin's voice had changed. The practiced patience was gone. What was left underneath was something rawer and considerably less composed. "I need to talk to you." She said nothing. She had learned in 6 weeks of watching Woo-Jin operate that silence was not emptiness. It was pressure. "I made a mistake." The words came out like something he'd rehearsed and then abandoned halfway through. "I've been doing the numbers and Amaka's family. It's not what I thought. And my partners, the Abuja group, the Fatahunsi account, they've gone quiet, all of them, at the same time." A pause. "That's not a coincidence, Mariam." She didn't confirm or deny it. It wasn't something she had arranged. It was simply what happened when people who had always respected Mariam's judgment discovered where Mariam now stood and quietly updated their calculations. "I saw the photographs." His voice shifted into something that wanted to sound like tenderness and didn't quite get there. "You look, I don't even know how to describe it. That woman in those pictures, standing there like that, I always knew that was in you. I wasn't." "Kelvin," her voice was quiet, even. "I'm asking you to think about whether this is really what you want. Some arrangement with a man you don't even know. Because what we had 7 years, Mariam, that means something." She thought about the conference room, the dress, the cufflinks she had chosen and had engraved, the settlement figure printed in clean, indifferent type. "It did mean something," she said. "You're right about that." A pause. He thought he was getting somewhere. "I know," she said. "Goodbye, Kelvin." She ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. The office was very quiet. Through the connecting door, which was open 3 inches, as it usually was during working hours, she was aware of Woo-Jin at his own desk. He had not made a sound during the call, had not moved, as far as she could tell, had not done anything to indicate he had heard every word in the silence of a floor where sound traveled cleanly. She picked up the property document and found her place again. After a moment, she glanced toward the connecting door. Woo-Jin was looking at her, not with the boardroom attention, not with the focused, analytical regard she had catalogued across 6 weeks of sessions and dinners and carefully maintained distance. With something else entirely, something he hadn't shown her yet. He looked away first. Mariam looked back down at her document and said nothing at all. The report arrived on a Wednesday, delivered by hand to Woo-Jin's office in a sealed envelope that his head of security brought up personally, rather than routing through the usual channels. Mariam was present when he opened it. She had been present for most things by then. It had stopped being a conscious decision and become simply the shape of how they worked. He read it without expression, which told her nothing. Then he set it on the desk between them, which told her everything. She read it. Her aunt had not died of natural causes. The cardiac event had been induced, carefully, technically, in a way designed to withstand a standard autopsy without complication. It had taken Woo-Jin's people 8 weeks and a forensic specialist in Amsterdam to find what the original examination had missed. Mariam set the report down. She was quiet for a long moment. "You suspected," she said. "I thought it was possible," Woo-Jin said. "The timing was too convenient. Your aunt had refused the Park Lim Consortium's final acquisition offer 4 months before she died. She had also, in the same month, begun formalizing the terms of the alliance with my family." He paused. "People like Park Lim don't accept refusals. They restructure the problem. And now I'm the problem. Now you're the obstacle," he said. "Which is different. Obstacles can be removed, discredited, or frightened into compliance." His eyes met hers. "They will try all three." The dinner was that Friday. It was a quarterly gathering of the consortium's adjacent partners, the kind of event where business was conducted through implication and social architecture rather than anything said directly. Mariam had been briefed. She went in clear-eyed. The confrontation was staged with some sophistication. A woman she didn't recognize, positioned across the table, who began asking questions about Mariam's background, her professional history, her family, the speed of the marriage, with the particular precision of someone who had been given a script and rehearsed it. The subtext was legible to everyone present. She was an outsider, an unknown quantity, possibly a liability. The marriage was expedient. The alliance was fragile. The table shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward uncertainty. Woo-Jin let it run for exactly 45 seconds. Then he spoke, one sentence, quiet and without inflection, in a tone that Mariam had not heard him use before, something beneath politeness, beneath even authority. Something that simply ended things. The woman stopped speaking. The table went still. No one revisited the line of questioning. In the car afterward, the city sliding past the windows, Mariam looked at him. "Are we in danger?" Woo-Jin didn't hesitate. Yes. She appreciated that. She had grown tired over the course of her life of men who softened true things. "Which is why," he continued, "it's important that you stop thinking of this as my empire." He looked at her steadily. "And start thinking of it as ours." The words settled in the space between them, small and precise and heavier than either of them had perhaps intended. Mariam held his gaze. "Then show me everything," she said. "No more partial briefings." Woo-Jin nodded once. "I was waiting for you to ask." She had underestimated how desperate Kelvin had become. That was her error, and she acknowledged it to herself without flinching. She had looked at the man from the conference room, measured, rehearsed, certain of his calculations, and assumed that certainty would hold even as the calculations failed. She had forgotten that confident men, when they finally understand they have lost, do not become humble. They become dangerous in smaller, uglier ways. Kelvin had made contact with the Park Lim group on a Saturday. He had not gone looking for them. That detail, when she later understood the full sequence, was almost worse. They had come to him through a mutual business contact, a dinner that had been arranged to look accidental, a conversation that had been steered with professional patience toward an offer framed as an opportunity. All he had to do was share what he knew. Her schedule, the penthouse address, the specific terms of the marriage arrangement, which he had obtained through someone in their shared social circle who had heard more than they should have at the wrong kind of gathering. He had told himself it was just information, that he wasn't responsible for what other people did with it. Woo-Jin's people found out within 48 hours. He came to her office on a Monday morning without preamble, set a folder on her desk, and stepped back. He did not sit down. He did not explain. He simply waited. Mariam opened the folder. She read slowly, which was not her usual pace. She read slowly because she was making herself stay with each page rather than moving ahead to the conclusion, because the conclusion was something she already understood and wasn't yet ready to arrive at. Kelvin had handed her location and her vulnerabilities to the people who had killed her aunt. She closed the folder. The office was very quiet. Outside the glass, Seoul moved through its morning with total indifference, which she found, in this particular moment, almost comforting. "How contained is it?" she asked. "Currently," Woo-Jin said, "completely. They received the information. They haven't acted on it yet. We moved faster." She nodded slowly, looked at the folder again without opening it. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Woo-Jin was quiet for a moment. When she looked up, he was watching her with an expression she had catalogued only once before in the office, over a document, for less than 4 seconds. Something unguarded, something that had not been part of the original terms. "That's not my decision," he said. His voice was careful and deliberate. "He was your husband." Mariam understood the full weight of what he was offering. Not just the choice, but the deference itself. Woo-Jin, who decided everything in his world with the calm finality of someone who had never needed permission, was handing this to her completely. It was the first time. They both felt it. She stood, walked to the window, looked at the city for a long moment. Then she turned back. "Get me Mr. Johnson," she said quietly, "and make sure Kelvin's attorney is available tomorrow." She wasn't going to be graceful about this. She was going to be precise. 6 months after signing her name in a conference room in a dress bought for a dinner that never happened, Mariam Bello stepped out of a black Rolls-Royce into the entrance of the Odyssey Hotel and understood, for the first time in her life, what it felt like to take up exactly the right amount of space. The gown was the same one from the wedding, black, gold-accented, fitted in a way that had nothing to prove. The diamond earrings caught the light as she moved. Her hair was swept into a low, immaculate updo, and her posture was the posture of a woman who had finally stopped allocating energy to apology. Woo-Jin stepped out beside her. Dark coat, composed expression, the particular stillness that had stopped feeling remote to her weeks ago and now simply felt like him. He offered his arm without theater. She took it without hesitation. They walked in. The room reorganized. Not dramatically, there was no collective gasp, no parting of crowds. It was subtler and more satisfying than that. Conversations recalibrated. Heads turned and stayed turned a moment longer than courtesy required. The people who mattered, and Mariam now knew precisely who they were, offered greetings with the specific quality of acknowledgement reserved for equals. She had become someone whose name arrived before she did. Her aunt, she thought, would have found this entirely unsurprising. The introductions moved smoothly, each exchange an exercise in the fluency she had spent 6 months building. She was present, warm when warmth was strategic, direct when directness served better, and always, always paying attention beneath the surface of whatever the room believed she was doing. She was near the far end of the reception hall, mid-conversation with a Singapore-based partner whose account had been her aunt's longest alliance, when she felt the shift. A subtle change in the room's texture, a ripple of awareness moving through the crowd toward her. She turned. Kelvin had aged in the particular way that regret aged people, not in years exactly, but in something harder to name. A wearing down around the eyes. A diminishment of the easy confidence that had once made him seem like a man who knew where he was going. His jacket was slightly rumpled. His hands, as he crossed the room toward her, were not entirely steady. The people nearby noticed. Conversations didn't stop, but they slowed. He stopped in front of her. And then, in the entrance of the most prominent gala in the city, with its marble floors and its assembled power and its many careful witnesses, Kelvin Okoro sank to his knees. His hands came together. "Mariam," his voice was stripped of everything rehearsed. "Please, I was wrong. I see who you are now. I see all of it. 7 years I threw away 7 years because I was too foolish to understand what I had. Please." The room had gone quiet in the immediate radius around them. Not silent, the gala continued at its edges, but in this small circle of marble and chandelier light, everyone was still. Mariam looked down at him. She waited for something to move inside her. Some remnant of the love she had organized her life around for 7 years, some echo of the woman who had worn a dress to a divorce hoping he would look at her and remember. She waited for grief or anger or the complicated ache of being seen too late. There was nothing. Not coldness, not triumph, just a clean, final clarity, the feeling of a door that had been closed for months and was only now being properly locked. "I see who I am too," she said quietly. That's exactly the problem. She held his gaze for one more moment, giving him the dignity of being truly heard and truly answered. Then she turned. Woo-Jin was 3 feet away. He had not moved toward her, had not intervened, had not done anything except what she had come to understand was his most consistent quality. He had trusted her completely to handle what was hers to handle. He offered his arm. She took it. They moved back into the room, and the gala folded around them, and Kelvin remained where he was for a long moment before someone quietly helped him to his feet. Mariam didn't look back. There was nothing behind her worth turning for. The rest of the evening passed the way evenings did when you had finally become the person you were supposed to be, present and purposeful and unafraid of the space you occupied. It was late when they returned to the penthouse. The city glittered below the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul in its endless, purposeful illumination, and Mariam stood at the glass for a moment in the particular quiet that follows a day that has closed something permanently. Woo-Jin set his coat over the chair, loosened his collar, moved to the kitchen in the easy, habitual way of a man in a space that now belonged to both of them. Because it did, because somewhere in the architecture of business and strategy and late nights over documents and 1,000 small moments of unexpected honesty, it had simply become that. She turned from the window. "I need to tell you something." He looked up. In his face, she saw it fully now, what she had been cataloging in fragments since a Thursday afternoon over a property document when he had looked at her and forgotten, briefly, to be careful. There was no performance in him. There never had been. He had offered her loyalty when she expected transaction, deference when she expected control, and space to become herself when every other significant person in her life had quietly required her to be less. "I know," Woo-Jin said. His voice was low and certain and entirely without pretense. He crossed the room. "I've been waiting for you to say it." And Mariam Bello, who had signed her name in a dress bought for a dinner that never came, who had walked into an inheritance she didn't know existed, who had built herself into something her aunt had always known she would become, finally, completely, and without a single gesture of apology, let herself be chosen by someone who had seen her clearly from the very beginning. This was not the beginning of another chapter. This was the end of the story she needed to survive, and the quiet, certain start of the life she had always deserved. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, please remember to subscribe to this channel, like and comment your thoughts on the story. By doing this, you support the channel's growth and encourages us to bring more interesting stories like this.